That thing is worth less than the tires on our prototype. Madeline Pierce said it with a laugh sharp enough to turn half the Detroit Auto Innovation Summit toward the entrance bay, where Eli Turner had just rolled in behind the wheel of a faded 1971 Chevrolet Nova that looked like it had survived every winter Michigan had ever thrown at it. The driver's side paint was sunburned down to primer, the rear bumper sat a little crooked, and the passenger door needed one firm pull before it would close. Beside him, 8-year-old Lucy Turner sat with a sketchbook pressed against her chest, her cheeks turning pink as cameras, engineers, and men in expensive jackets stared at the car like it had wandered into the wrong century. The summit floor gleamed with million-dollar prototypes, electric concept vehicles, polished chrome displays, and bright white banners promising the future of mobility. Then there was Eli's Nova, coughing once as it settled into place, its dull green hood scratched, its windshield sticker peeling, its tires ordinary enough to look almost embarrassed. Madeline Pierce, 34, Chief Executive Officer of Pierce Automotive Group, stood near the main diagnostic platform in a tailored white blazer, blonde hair neat, blue eyes cool, surrounded by investors and senior engineers who understood that when she laughed, the room had permission to laugh with her. A few chuckles moved through the crowd. One camera operator lowered his lens to get a better shot of the joke. Derek Sloan, Pierce Automotive's head of advanced engineering, smiled too quickly, but his eyes did not smile at all. He recognized the man behind the wheel before anyone else did, and recognition made him still. Eli stepped out slowly, wearing a worn denim jacket over a clean work shirt, his hands rough from years in a small garage in Warren, Michigan. He walked around to Lucy's side and opened the door with care, shielding her from the crowd with his body the way fathers do when the world forgets children are listening. "Daddy," Lucy whispered, "are they laughing at us?" Eli looked at the old car, then at the polished machines around them, then at his daughter. "They are laughing at what they can see." Madeline heard enough to tilt her head. "Mr. Turner, is it? This lane is for certified prototypes, not backyard nostalgia projects." Eli nodded once. "It is certified." Another laugh came from somewhere behind her. Madeline folded her arms. "Then impress us quickly before that thing leaves parts on my floor." Lucy looked down at her sketchbook. Eli placed one hand on the Nova's hood, not possessive, not ashamed, almost grateful. The air smelled of rubber, coffee, camera batteries, and expensive ambition. Overhead lights hummed. Somewhere, a display screen counted down testing slots in clean digital numbers. Eli's voice stayed quiet, but it carried just far enough. "Maybe it is worth less than your tires." Madeline's smile sharpened. Then Eli looked toward the silent diagnostic bay and added, "But your prototype still cannot do what this can." The laughter thinned. Derek's face lost a shade of color. Eli reached under the hood latch, lifted the scarred metal, and the first row of engineers leaned forward. Inside the $300 shell was no junkyard engine, no smoky relic, no desperate patchwork of borrowed parts. It was a clean, compact hybrid system, hand-built with copper lines, silent cooling modules, polished recovery cells, and a heat converter so elegantly arranged that even Madeline forgot to blink. The old Nova sat ugly under the bright lights, but beneath its damaged hood, something priceless was breathing. That morning, before the bright summit lights made his old Nova look like a mistake, Eli Turner had been in the garage behind his small house in Warren, Michigan, listening to the furnace rattle and the wind push dry leaves against the aluminum door. The sun had not fully risen yet, only a pale blue line above the roofs, and Lucy sat on an overturned milk crate near the workbench, coloring the Nova in her sketchbook with a red crayon, because, she said, every brave car deserved a heart. Eli smiled at that while tightening a connector near the heat recovery module, his fingers moving with the quiet memory of a man who had built the same system so many times in his mind that the metal almost answered him. The garage smelled of old oil, cold concrete, toast from the kitchen, and the faint sweetness of the peppermint tea his wife Rachel used to drink when the medicine made coffee taste too bitter. On the wall above the toolbox was a photograph of Rachel wrapped in a gray cardigan, sitting in the passenger seat of that same Nova, laughing because the door handle had come off in her hand. Back then, Eli had paid $300 cash for the car from a retired mail carrier who said it needed everything except hope. Rachel had loved it immediately. She said ugly things were easier to trust because they had already survived embarrassment. Lucy looked up from her drawing. Is this the engine you made for Mom? Eli stopped for half a second, then reached for a rag and wiped his hands slowly. He could have given her a simple answer. Yes. No. Not exactly. But children deserve truth shaped gently, not truth hidden because adults are tired. The first version was for her, he said. She wanted to come home from the hospital more often. Gas was expensive. Appointments were far. I thought if I could make an old car run farther on less, maybe we could have more days together. Lucy pressed the red crayon harder against the paper. Did it work? Eli looked at the photograph. For a while, the garage grew still around them. Not empty, just full of the kind of memory that speaks softly if you do not rush past it. Lucy slid off the crate and walked to the Nova, placing one small hand on the scratched hood. Then it is not junk. Eli smiled, but his eyes were wet. No, sweetheart. It never was. On the workbench, beneath a stack of sandpaper and old receipts, lay a folder he had not opened in years. Pierce Automotive Group. Advanced Thermal Hybrid Recovery Program. His name was on the earliest pages, handwritten in pencil beside sketches made during nights when Rachel slept and Lucy was a baby in a playpen near his feet. But later pages told a colder story. Eli Turner, removed from active development. Derek Sloan, project lead. Notes revised. Credits changed. A man could lose a job and survive. He could lose money and rebuild. But watching someone bury the truth while calling it progress was a quieter wound, one that did not bleed where people could see. Lucy noticed the logo on the folder. Is that the company from today? Yes. Are they going to say sorry? Eli closed the folder and tucked it beneath the seat cover he planned to bring. People do not always say sorry before they understand what they did. What if they laugh? He lowered himself beside her, eye to eye, the way he had promised Rachel he always would when life grew too big for their daughter. Then we let them laugh at the outside, he said, and we show them what is still alive inside. By 7:30, the Nova rolled out of the garage, dull green paint catching the weak morning light, exhaust quiet, dashboard rebuilt with parts no dealership would recognize. Lucy buckled herself in and hugged her sketchbook. Eli reached once toward Rachel's photograph clipped near the visor, touched 2 fingers to its edge, and started the engine. It did not roar. It breathed. And as they drove toward Detroit, past tire shops, breakfast diners, and factories waking under the gray Michigan sky, Eli knew he was not going to the summit to prove a rich woman wrong. He was going because his daughter needed to see that dignity can ride in something scratched, dented, and laughed at, and still arrive carrying the truth. While Eli and Lucy drove toward Detroit in a car the world was ready to mock, Madeline Pierce was already inside the glass conference suite above the summit floor, standing before a wall of performance charts that told a story no chief executive officer wanted to hear. Pierce Automotive Group had spent $12 million on its newest electric prototype, and the numbers still looked like a confession. Thermal stability failed after repeated urban cycles. Battery recovery lagged below target. Range dropped sharply under cold weather simulation. The words were clean, but the meaning was ugly. The future she had promised investors was not ready to survive a Michigan winter. Madeline stood with her arms folded, white blazer perfect, face calm, blue eyes fixed on the screen, as if discipline alone could force the data to improve. Around the table, engineers avoided looking directly at her. Investors whispered over coffee. A public relations director kept refreshing headlines on a tablet, waiting to see whether the morning would become a triumph or a wound. Derek Sloan stood beside the main display with a laser pointer in one hand and polished confidence in the other. The issue is not structural, he said. We need more testing time, a larger cooling budget, and a better software envelope. Nothing unusual at this stage. Madeline did not move. We have failed 3 validation runs. Derek smiled carefully. Failed is a dramatic word. Investors use dramatic words when they lose money. The room quieted. Outside the glass, the summit floor shimmered with chrome, white banners, camera lights, and the kind of expensive optimism companies rent when they are afraid of the truth. Madeline had built her career on never appearing afraid. Her father had founded Pierce as a supplier shop with 20 employees and a belief that Detroit could still make things that mattered. By the time she inherited the company, the world wanted electric promises, clean branding, and quarterly miracles. She gave them all 3, at least from a distance. Up close, The pressure was beginning to show in the small ways. The coffee she never finished, the sleep she never admitted missing, the way she judged anything imperfect before it could threaten the image she had worked so hard to protect. Derek tapped the screen. Today is about confidence. We keep the media focused on the prototype, not side distractions. What side distractions? Madeline asked. A coordinator entered with the final participant list and handed it to Derek. His eyes moved down the page. For 1 second, the polished confidence slipped. Not much, just enough for Madeline to notice. What is it? She asked. Derek cleared his throat. Eli Turner is registered in the independent prototype lane. One of the younger engineers looked up too quickly. Madeline caught that as well. Should I know that name? Derek gave a small laugh, too light for the room. Former contractor. Garage mechanic now. Brilliant in his own mind. Bitter in everyone else's. Bitter about what? Leaving before the work mattered. Madeline studied him. And you are worried? I am practical, Derek said. Men like Turner show up at events like this for attention. A rusted car, a sad story, maybe a child for sympathy. He could embarrass the brand if someone gives him a microphone. Madeline looked through the glass toward the lower entry bay, where independent builders were beginning to arrive with trailers, tool carts, and dreams held together by money they could not afford to lose. Then keep him away from the diagnostic bay until we verify his credentials. Derek nodded, already typing a message to the technical staff. Do not let Turner near primary testing. Route him to overflow. No exceptions. He sent it with one thumb, then slipped the phone into his jacket as if he had done nothing more than confirm lunch. But beneath the table, his hand tightened. Because Eli Turner was not a bitter mechanic. Eli Turner was the name buried in the first version of the system Derek had built his reputation on. And if that old Nova carried even half of what Eli once knew, the ugliest car at the summit might become the one thing Madeline Pierce could not afford to laugh at. Eli Turner was supposed to park in the overflow lane, somewhere behind the food trucks and student robotics displays, far enough from the main cameras that no one important would have to explain why a scratched-up 1971 Chevrolet Nova had been allowed into a summit built for the future. That was what the young technician at the gate told him while holding a tablet and avoiding his eyes. Your credentials are under review, the technician said. We were instructed to route you to secondary staging. Eli rested one hand on the steering wheel. Lucy sat beside him with her sketchbook hugged tightly against her chest, watching the polished prototype cars glide past on enclosed carriers toward the bright testing bay. But our badge says independent prototype lane, she whispered. Eli nodded. It does. He handed the technician the printed confirmation, the vehicle certification, and the inspection number he had received 2 weeks earlier. The technician looked at the papers, then at the Nova's faded hood, then back at the tablet, as if paper truth had less weight than digital permission. I am sorry, sir. It is about presentation standards. Lucy's face changed. Children understand insult before they understand policy. Presentation standards? Eli asked quietly. The technician shifted. The summit has media partners here. From behind them came a smooth electric hum as a silver concept car passed under the main arch, its paint flawless, its windows black, its price tag hidden behind words like innovation and luxury. Lucy looked down at the red heart she had drawn on the Nova in her sketchbook and closed the cover. That hurt Eli more than the gate. He had known the world would laugh at Rust. He had not wanted his daughter to watch grown adults confuse shine with worth. Then Madeline Pierce appeared near the diagnostic platform with Derek Sloan at her side. A camera crew trailed them, along with investors who smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee. Derek leaned close and murmured something that made Madeline glance toward Eli's car. Her smile arrived before her mercy did. Let it through, she said, loud enough for nearby engineers to hear. If Mr. Turner believes that belongs beside real prototypes, we should not deny the room a comparison. A few people laughed. The technician lifted the barrier. Eli drove forward slowly, the Nova rolling over the smooth summit floor with one soft squeak from the rear suspension. Every sound seemed bigger under the lights. One engineer near a charging station muttered, "Looks like a junkyard mistake." Lucy heard it. Her eyes filled, but she refused to cry. Eli parked in the assigned lane, turned off the engine, and sat for one extra breath before opening the door. "Daddy," Lucy said, "maybe we should go." He turned toward her. "Do you know why we came?" She looked at the sketchbook. To show them the engine. No, Eli said gently. To show you that laughter is not a judge. He stepped out, walked around to her side, and knelt beside the open passenger door, ignoring the cameras, the whispers, the polished people pretending not to stare. Never let someone's laughter decide what you are worth, he said. Lucy wiped her cheek with her sleeve and nodded. Madeline watched from 20 feet away, her arms folded, still amused but not entirely untouched. There was something in how Eli spoke to his daughter that did not fit the story Derek had told her. No bitterness, no performance, only quiet dignity, the kind that made mockery feel smaller without answering it directly. Derek noticed her watching and quickly raised his voice. All right, Mr. Turner. If you are finished with the family moment, open it up. Let us see what $300 buys these days. Eli stood. He did not look at Derek first. He looked at Lucy. Then he placed his hand on the scarred hood of the Nova and said softly, "Respect is not proven by paint." The words were not meant for the crowd, but somehow the nearest row heard them. A hush began at the edges of the lane. Eli reached beneath the hood latch. Derek's smile tightened. Madeline's eyes narrowed. And Lucy, still holding her sketchbook, lifted her chin just as the old metal rose and the laughter prepared to meet what it had not expected. When the hood of the Nova rose, the first reaction was not awe. It was confusion. People had prepared themselves for rust, smoke, loose wires, and the kind of desperate repair work that made good engineers look away out of second-hand embarrassment. Instead, under the scratched green hood sat a system so clean it made the old car around it seem almost like a disguise. Copper cooling lines curved with careful precision. A compact thermal converter rested low near the firewall. Recovery cells were mounted in a custom frame no larger than a suitcase, each connection labeled by hand in neat black marker. The battery module was small, sealed, and cooled by a silent airflow channel Eli had shaped from aluminum scraps and patience. For a few seconds, no one laughed because no one knew what to laugh at. A young engineer stepped closer, squinting. Who installed this? Eli wiped one thumb along the edge of the hood. I did. At what shop? Mine. Derek gave a short laugh, but it came out thinner than before. A home garage build is not the same as validated engineering. Eli nodded. That is why I brought it to a validation bay. A few people murmured. Madeline moved closer despite herself, her white blazer catching the overhead light, her earlier smile gone. She leaned over the engine compartment, expecting to find shortcuts, amateur mistakes, something she could dismiss. Instead, she found restraint. Every wire had a purpose. Every line had space. Every component looked serviceable by someone who understood not just performance, but families who could not afford specialty technicians and luxury repairs. This cooling layout, she said slowly. Where did you learn it? Eli looked toward Derek for the first time. Long nights. Lucy stood behind the safety rope with her sketchbook pressed to her chest, watching adults look at her father the way they should have looked from the beginning. Pride flickered in her face, small and brave. A diagnostics technician connected the scanner to the Nova's custom port. The monitor blinked, loaded, then displayed a thermal recovery map so efficient that the technician's mouth opened slightly. This is not standard architecture, he said. No, Eli replied. Standard kept failing in cold weather. Madeline's eyes sharpened. How would you know what our standard architecture is? Derek stepped in quickly. Madeline, we should not entertain proprietary claims from an unverified participant. Eli did not raise his voice. Then verify it. The technician scrolled deeper. A file label appeared within the system notes. Rachel Cycle version 7. Lucy saw her mother's name on the screen and reached for the safety rope, then stopped herself. Madeline noticed. Something about that name, paired with the child's sudden stillness, cooled the room more than the air conditioning ever could. Rachel? She asked. Eli's hand rested on the hood. My wife. The first version was built to get her home from appointments without draining everything we had. The crowd shifted. A car that had been a joke 5 minutes ago had become something heavier, a machine carrying love, grief, and genius beneath bad paint. Derek's jaw tightened. Sentiment does not equal performance. Eli looked at him with tired eyes. No, but performance without purpose is just noise. The technician ran the preliminary scan. Numbers rose across the monitor. Heat loss, energy recovery, cold start efficiency, regeneration stability. One by one, the expressions around the bay changed. The young engineer who had asked where it was installed whispered, "This beats the Pierce baseline." Madeline turned sharply. "By how much?" The technician swallowed. "Enough that we need a full run." The summit floor grew quiet around the ugly old Nova. Cameras lifted again, but this time not to capture a joke. Derek reached for the tablet in the technician's hand. "We need to pause this." Eli stepped back, palms open, calm as ever. "Pause it if you want." But the engine already answered. And beneath the scarred hood, the silent system kept humming, steady and clean, like the truth waiting for permission no longer. Madeline Pierce did not approve the full run because she trusted Eli Turner yet. She approved it because the numbers on the preliminary scan were too strong to ignore, and because every investor on the summit floor had begun watching the ugly old Nova instead of her $12 million prototype. The testing bay opened like a stage, wide and bright, with painted lanes, sensor arches, rolling resistance platforms, and a 10-mile urban simulation route displayed across 3 screens. Pierce Automotive's silver prototype waited in the first lane, flawless under the lights, surrounded by engineers with headsets and tablets. Eli's Nova waited in the second lane, dull green, scratched, ordinary, with Lucy standing behind the safety barrier, holding her sketchbook so tightly the corners bent. Madeline walked to Eli before the test began. "If this fails," she said, "it fails publicly." Eli looked at the lane ahead. "Most important things do." Derek stood behind her, his smile controlled but thin. "We should run Pierce first. Let the certified system establish a baseline." Madeline nodded, and the silver prototype rolled forward in near silence. At first, it was everything the banners promised. Smooth launch, clean acceleration, elegant telemetry. The crowd relaxed. Cameras followed. Derek's shoulders lowered by half an inch. Then the cold weather segment began. On the main screen, the thermal graph climbed. Not dangerously, not dramatically, but steadily, the way disappointment often rises when people are still pretending not to see it. Energy recovery dropped. Range projection slipped. A warning light flashed amber on one engineer's tablet. Derek spoke quickly. "Software correction can smooth that curve." Madeline did not answer. The prototype completed the run, but the applause came late and careful, more polite than proud. Then Eli stepped into the Nova. Lucy pressed her palm to the barrier. "Daddy." He looked back and smiled. "It is just a drive, sweetheart." But it was not just a drive. Not to her. Not to Madeline. Not to Derek, whose face had gone still. Eli turned the key, and the old car did not roar. It woke softly, with a low electric hum beneath the tired dashboard, a sound so gentle it made the noisy summit seem rude. The Nova entered the simulation lane. First mile, clean. Second mile, stable. By the third, the thermal graph barely moved. By the fifth, the energy recovery line climbed higher than Pierce's best laboratory projection. The technician at the monitoring station leaned forward. "That cannot be right." Madeline stepped closer to the screen. "Check the sensors." "Already did." The Nova moved through stop-and-go traffic simulation, cold start load, hill resistance, and low-speed regeneration. It did not look beautiful doing it. The rear panel rattled once. The passenger door gave a tiny shake. But inside, the system held like a promise made by someone who had no luxury of failing. At mile 8, the crowd stopped whispering. At mile 9, one of Madeline's senior engineers took off his glasses and stared at the numbers without blinking. At mile 10, the final efficiency report appeared across the main screen. The Nova had beaten the Pierce prototype in thermal stability, cold cycle recovery, and projected city range. Not by a miracle, by engineering. Lucy covered her mouth with both hands. Eli rolled to a stop and shut off the engine. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but the hum of overhead lights and the quiet ticking of cooling metal. Then a technician whispered, "A $300 car just outperformed our flagship." Derek snapped. "It is not a $300 car. It is an unauthorized system using stolen architecture." The word stolen hit the room hard. Cameras turned. Madeline looked from Derek to Eli, expecting anger, denial, something loud enough to match the accusation. But Eli only stepped out, closed the fragile door with a careful pull, and looked at his daughter before he looked at anyone else. "Lucy," he said softly, "bring me the blue folder from the back seat." Derek's expression changed. Madeline saw it. The first real crack. Lucy ran to the Nova. returned with a worn folder covered in crayon stickers, and placed it in her father's hands. Eli held it against his chest for a moment, as if it carried more than paper. Then he looked at Madeline and said, "If we are going to talk about what was stolen, we should start with the truth." Madeline Pierce did not take the blue folder from Eli right away. She looked at Derek first, because powerful rooms often reveal themselves by where everyone looks when truth arrives. Derek's face had tightened into the polished expression of a man trying to outrun a document. The summit floor had gone still around them, the kind of stillness that made every camera click sound too loud. Eli opened the folder on the edge of the diagnostic table. The first pages were not legal threats. They were pencil sketches, hand-drawn thermal maps, old test notes, fuel receipts, hospital parking passes, and photographs of Rachel sitting in the Nova with a blanket over her knees and a brave smile on her face. Lucy stood close to her father, one hand holding the corner of his denim jacket. Madeline reached for the top page. It was dated 7 years earlier, long before Derek had presented anything similar as Pierce Innovation. Across the bottom, written in neat block letters, was Eli Turner, Preliminary Thermal Recovery Design. Madeline's eyes moved slowly. This was submitted to Pierce. Eli nodded. Before Rachel got worse. Derek stepped forward. Handwritten notes prove nothing. Anyone can create a folder after the fact. Eli turned another page without answering him. There were internal review comments, engineering stamps, early test signatures, and an old access badge clipped inside a plastic sleeve. Madeline saw the Pierce logo in the corner, and something cold moved through her. The crowd leaned in, but Eli stayed calm. "I was not trying to build a miracle," he said. "I was trying to make a car cheap enough for families like mine to keep running when hospitals, groceries, and rent all came due in the same week." Lucy opened her sketchbook then, not because anyone asked, but because children sometimes understand the heart of a story before adults understand the evidence. She showed Madeline a drawing of Eli at a workbench beside a bed, Rachel sleeping under a quilt, baby Lucy in a playpen, the Nova outside a window with a little red heart on the hood. Underneath, in uneven letters, she had written, "Dad built the engine so Mom could come home." Madeline stared at the drawing, and the expensive summit blurred for a moment. This was not a stunt. This was not a bitter mechanic trying to steal attention. This was a man who had made engineering out of love and then watched men in cleaner offices erase the fingerprints. Derek's voice cut in, strained now. "This is emotional manipulation." Eli looked at him then, steady and quiet. "No, Derek. This is a child telling the truth in crayon because adults buried it in folders." A senior independent validator stepped forward, holding a tablet. "We pulled the preliminary patent archive after the test result flagged similarity. The original disclosure lists Eli Turner as primary contributor. The later internal summary changed project leadership to Derek Sloan." The words did not explode. They simply landed. One by one. Heavy. Final. Madeline turned to Derek. "Did you remove his name?" Derek opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward the investors, looked toward the cameras. For the first time all morning, he had no polished sentence ready. Eli did not smile. He did not lift his chin like a man enjoying revenge. His hand rested gently on Lucy's shoulder. "I lost the job," he said. "I lost time. I lost money. I lost my wife. But I never lost the truth." Madeline looked at the old Nova, then at the little girl clutching her sketchbook, then at the man she had laughed at before the world. The sound of the summit seemed to fade behind her. She had spent years trusting shine, scale, and confidence. Now a scratched hood and a blue folder had shown her something her $1 million prototype had not. Purpose. And in that bright diagnostic bay, with the ugliest car in the room standing beside the cleanest evidence, the laughter finally had nowhere left to hide. Madeline Pierce had two choices in front of her, and both were standing under the same white summit lights. One was the polished version of power she had protected for years, the version with press releases, investor confidence, expensive prototypes, and men like Derek Sloan who knew how to make theft sound like strategy. The other was Eli Turner, a single father in a worn denim jacket, standing beside a scratched-up Nova, and a little girl whose crayon drawing had just told more truth than a room full of executive summaries. Madeline turned toward the archive terminal near the diagnostic bay. "Open the internal records," she said. Derek stepped closer. "Madeline, this is not the appropriate venue." She did not look at him. Then you should not have made the lie public. A murmur passed through the engineers. The independent validator connected the tablet to Pierce Automotive's secure archive, and one by one the files appeared on the large screen. Advanced Thermal Hybrid Recovery Program. Original Contributor Notes. Revision History. Access Logs. Eli watched quietly as the years unfolded in timestamps and digital signatures. There was his first concept. There were Rachel's cycle test notes. There was the date he requested family medical leave. Then came the transfer. Derek Sloan, project lead. Contributor fields revised. Supporting files reclassified. Public summary updated. Madeline read every line without speaking, and the longer she stayed silent, the smaller Derek seemed to become. You told me he left before the work mattered, she said finally. Derek's voice came tight. He did leave. To care for his wife. That does not change ownership of company research. Eli's hand tightened once on Lucy's shoulder, then relaxed. He would not let anger become the thing his daughter remembered. Madeline turned from the screen to Derek. No, but changing the record changes trust. And you changed the record. Derek looked toward the investors, searching for rescue in faces that no longer wanted to be seen rescuing him. This is being oversimplified. Eli spoke then, quiet enough that people leaned in to hear him. I did not come here to take your stage, Derek. I came because my daughter heard people call our car junk, and I wanted her to know that something can be treated like trash and still carry value no one bothered to measure. The words moved through the bay like a slow bell. Lucy looked up at him, eyes bright, sketchbook held against her chest. Madeline felt the sting of her own laughter from earlier, not as embarrassment, but as a moral weight. She had mocked a car before she understood the grief inside it. She had mocked a father before she saw the engineer. She had mocked the outside because the outside was easy. She stepped forward, facing the crowd, the cameras, the engineers, and the investors. Effective immediately, Derek Sloan is suspended pending a full independent review of all project records connected to this system. Derek's face hardened, but no one followed him when he stepped back. Madeline turned to Eli. Her voice lost the cold edge it had carried all morning. Mr. Turner, I owe you an apology. Not privately. Not later. Now. I laughed at what I did not understand. I let someone else define your worth before I asked for your truth. That was wrong. The diagnostic bay went still. Eli looked at her for a long moment. An apology is a start. Then let me start correctly, Madeline said. Pierce Automotive will recognize you as the original creator of this architecture. Any future agreement will carry your name, your approval, and terms you choose with independent counsel. And if you walk away today, the truth still stays corrected. Eli lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but in the quiet restraint of a man who knew victory was not the same as healing. Lucy slipped her small hand into his. Daddy, she whispered, did they hear you? Eli looked at the screen where his name had finally returned to the work he built for Rachel, then at the old Nova sitting under the lights, ugly, faithful, and no longer alone. Yes, sweetheart, he said softly. This time, they heard the truth. 1 month later, the Nova returned to the Detroit Auto Innovation Summit through the same entrance bay where people had once laughed, but this time no one reached for a joke. The dull green paint was still dull. The rear bumper still sat a little crooked. The passenger door still needed one firm pull before it closed. Eli Turner had fixed the brakes, reinforced the frame, cleaned the wiring, and replaced what needed to be safe, but he refused to polish the car into something it had never been. On the side of the hood, just above a scratch shaped like a lightning bolt, he had added one small metal badge, built for Rachel. Lucy stood beside it in a blue dress, one hand resting gently on the fender as if touching the car meant touching her mother's memory. Across the hall, Pierce Automotive's display looked different too. The banners no longer promised luxury first. They promised access, recovery, and dignity for working families. Madeline Pierce stood near the front of the new exhibit, wearing a simple navy suit instead of the white blazer that had looked so perfect on the day she misjudged him. Her voice was steady as she addressed the engineers, investors, journalists, and independent builders gathered before her. This program begins with a correction, she said. Innovation does not always arrive polished. Sometimes it arrives scratched, underfunded, overlooked, and carrying the name of someone the system forgot to honor. Eli stood off to the side with Lucy, not on the main platform, because he had asked not to be displayed like a trophy. The partnership agreement carried his name in full. The independent review had restored his authorship. Derek Sloan was no longer with the project, pending final legal and corporate findings. But Eli had not returned for punishment. He had returned because the engine Rachel inspired could now help families who counted gas money, hospital miles, and repair bills the way his family once had. Madeline unveiled the Rachel Turner Mobility Fund, a program to support independent engineers, low-cost medical transportation research, and families who needed reliable vehicles to reach care without losing everything else. The applause was quiet at first, almost careful, then grew warmer. Lucy looked up at her father. "Mom would have liked that it still looks like you." Eli laughed softly, but his eyes filled. "You mean old and stubborn?" "No," Lucy said, serious as sunrise. "Real." Madeline heard it and lowered her gaze, because children had a way of naming grace before adults were brave enough to do it. Then she stepped toward Eli and handed him the small key fob used to start the live demonstration. "Would you do the honor?" Eli looked at Lucy. "Together?" Lucy nodded. They stood beside the Nova, father and daughter, the mechanic and the little girl who had watched him carry grief without letting it turn bitter. Eli pressed the start button. The engine did not roar. It breathed, soft and steady, the same gentle hum that had once carried Rachel home from appointments and now filled the great hall with something deeper than power. The crowd went silent. Not confused this time. Not embarrassed. Silent because everyone understood that they were not hearing a machine show off. They were hearing a promise survive. Madeline looked at Eli with respect that no longer needed words. The engineers looked at the old car as if the rust had become part of its testimony. Lucy placed both hands on the hood, smiling through tears. Eli bent close to her and said, "A car does not need to look expensive to carry something priceless." And in that quiet, under the bright Detroit lights, the $300 Nova stopped being a joke, a project, or a comeback. It became what it had always been: a father's love, a mother's memory, and proof that dignity can live under scratched paint until the world finally learns how to look inside.